Okay. All right, good evening, everybody, and Happy New Year. This is the Planning Board meeting of January 3rd, 2023. The first item on the agenda is for me to introduce the members of the Planning Board. So let me start over at the extreme left, and Doug Breskin. Sitting next to Doug is Von Dugan, Peter Goodwin, and then Mike Hodder, who is the vice chairman. To my right, John Thurston, Brad Harriman, who is the representative from the Board of Selectmen, and Julie Jacobs, who is our alternate. We have one item on for a public hearing, and this happens to be for an accessory apartment. Members of the board and public, if you would sort of carefully identify yourself, because Melissa is new, and so, you know, she's got to get used to who we are and what we're doing and that sort of thing. So, okay, the first item on the agenda is case 2023-01. This is a conditional use permit for accessory dwelling units for Charles Finney and Allison Gervais of 17 Highland Terrace in Wolfeboro, tax map 201-081, and this is for the public hearing. If you would come on up and tell us who you are and explain the project to us a little.
Thank you, and Happy New Year, Chair Barnard. My name is Charles Finney. I'm the owner of 17 Highland Terrace. My wife, Allison, and I bought the property a year ago, this past October, from the Melanson family. And we endeavored to make some improvements to the living space above the garages. Our builder, John Gothier, is here in the audience as well. As we got near the end of the project, we started to understand the value, both to the community and to ourselves, of converting this living space that we had improved above the garage into an ADU, and decided to apply for the permit, essentially. The work is completed. And we just wanted to request your approval for lawful use of the property as an ADU.
Okay, so you've filled out the form, and
yes.
The one thing I was curious about, do you have proof of occupancy that you and your wife will be residing at one of the dwelling units?
Yes, we would be the residents of one of the two units. Our plan is to use the main residence as our residence.
Okay. Okay.
And then use the above garage improved space as an ADU.
Tavis, did you want to add anything?
Not necessarily anything to add at this point. I believe it's complete the way the application was submitted. I do have some recommended conditions if we get to that point.
Okay. Board members, any questions?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman. It seems to me that there are 2 points of procedure that have to be dealt with before we can approve or disapprove this application. First, we have to find that it meets the conditional use criteria, and that you'll find in 175-215. There are 3 of them. And then if we do find that, then we have to go on to see whether or not the ADU meets the criteria outlined in 175-57-1, which is the form, essentially the form that you just referred to. So I'd like to tackle the conditional use permit criteria first, if that's okay with you. There are 3 of them: site suitability, neighborhood impact, and no undue nuisance to the public or to traffic. And knowing the site, knowing the building, having been friends with the Melansons before, I can say this site clearly is suitable. It's on a big enough lot. There's certainly adequate space, adequate access, and there are no apparent environmental issues, to at least my untrained eyes. As far as neighborhood impact is concerned, because the ADU is inside, as a minor addition to the roof of the garage, there's no breach in the aesthetic continuity of the neighborhood. So I would imagine, in my opinion at any rate, neighborhood impact is minimal, if nothing. And given the nature of the application, there's likely to be no undue nuisance to the public or to additional traffic. So in my opinion, the application meets all three parts of the conditional use permit criteria, and that hurdle is over as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, anyone else? Had any questions?
I would just comment, the only thing is the egress, there are 2 skylights and 1 window, and that, I guess it's a new bedroom in the back?
It's the original space when we acquired the property from the Melansons. The bedroom was over the interior garage bay, and the exterior garage bay was an attic, a storage attic. So we moved the bedroom to the back attic and then created living area, kitchen area, and bathroom over the interior garage
So
space.
it's really not a planning board issue, it's a building code issue. You'll need an egress window.
Yeah.
If I may, a question for the planner. The applicant fills out the questionnaire for the accessory dwelling unit application. Are his answers verified?
The short answer is yes,
At what stage?
upon application.
So these have been verified?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other comments? Go ahead, John.
So during the construction process, were you going through the planning department to get all the, did you plan on making it an ADU initially?
Not initially. When we bought the property from the Melansons, this is, this is going to be our home, and we have, for instance, I'm having, my first granddaughter. I've got parents who live in New England as well, and so the original thinking was we need the space primarily as a kind of an in-law use rather than ADU use. But as we kind of move further along in the process, as we sort of became clearer to us, we wanted to take advantage of the ADU. So what we did was we went through the permitting process for the project as it was improved, and then decided to come forward and seek it being, I guess, authorized as an ADU through this process.
So you don't plan on using it for a short-term rental?
Absolutely not. And I understand that the conditions of approval would not allow that as well.
Any other questions before I open the public hearing?
In that regard, you do realize that if this is granted as an ADU,
Yes.
that your desire for no short-term rentals is not going to be something which governs how future owners of your property.
That it attaches to the,
Right. In other words, you're saying you're not going to do it, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be done in the future. When you're not the owners.
when I'm not the
When you have
owners,
no control.
I guess I'm unfamiliar with how the conditional use permit would carry forward if we sold the property at some point, but we don't have any intention of selling the property because we plan on using it for generations.
Okay,
40 or 50 years from now, you may not own it.
Oh, yeah.
okay, Tavis, do you want to comment on that?
At present, the town has no restriction on short-term rentals.
Right.
So whether Mr. Finney agreed to not do it, I mean, that's now on the record that he doesn't intend to do it. There's a planning board recommended warrant article that would define short-term rentals. and speak to the use for potential future owners. And I do not think it would be legally appropriate for the planning board to put such a condition on at this time because there are no rules to that effect.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll open the public hearing.
Should I st-
Thank
Thank
you. Okay, am I? And, okay, any member of the public want to comment on this application? Okay, Tavis, do you have some conditions for us to consider?
Yes, in this case, fairly standard conditions. Recommended conditions are the application becomes the sum of the packet, including everything that was represented this evening. Applicant will need to obtain an appropriate building permit to move forward if approved, and the applicant shall be responsible for paying the recording fees for the notice of decision.
Okay, okay, I'll close the public hearing then. No, go to the board. Would anyone want to make a motion on this application?
Sure, I'll be happy to move to approve case number 2023-01. Can I be heard? For an accessory dwelling unit at 17 Highland Terrace, the application having met the 3 criteria for the conditional use permit and the checklist provided by the planning department criteria as well, with the 3 conditions as stated by the planner.
Okay, I'll second the motion. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, you're all set. Okay, next item are discussion items. The first one is the impact fee.
I have a question
What-
about the
what-
impact fee.
Just, are the people here that are going to present the impact?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well,
I have a question of the impact fee, is why it is why is it the purview of the planning board to deal with this particular fee?
State law.
and that's what the ordinance says also.
Correct.
Okay, all right, then whoever is going to present this,
What's that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
who is going to present this?
Oh, so the town, as you're aware, I've been working with BCM on impact fee analysis. Bruce Mayberry had since retired prior to the completion of their work. So at the board's suggestion, I reached out to Bruce to see who else was in the trade, or as deep in the trench as he was, if you will. And Arnett Development Group, AKA Stu Arnett, is that person. So the town had a contract with him to sort of pick up where Mayberry left off and give some guidance and recommendations as to an overview of where the town is with regard to impact fees as the policies and procedures are adopted, and where we might want to go in terms of some recommendations for next steps. So with that, Stu Arnett is here from ADG.
Good evening.
Real life? Good. Nice to be here in a general sense and also a specific sense. About 20 minutes ago, I was on a dirt road going up about a 20-degree angle to try to get back to 28 because 28's closed for about 3 miles. So I wasn't quite sure if I was ever going to make it or not. So.
Oh, okay, and all of us have a copy of your report.
You do? Great, okay.
Yes, we do.
Well, it is nice to be back again, and nice to meet those of you who I don't know. I won't spend a lot of time going over all the points. I think we try to make the report as self-explanatory as possible. I just do one small caveat. The person who did most of the work for us and who dealt with Tavis on a regular day-to-day basis about a month ago was mobilized, so he's full-time with the Guard again, and they don't allow them to do any mixing of things. So some of the real specifics about what paperwork came first. He would have dealt with that. But I guess I don't want to restate what the report says, other than it's unlike what Bruce had done for you before in 2006 and 2009.
Just a second. What are you trying to?
Yeah, I was having a hard time hearing you back there too. I'm not sure.
You just have to get closer. Get right up. There you go.
Okay.
Feel free to move the microphone.
Talk like there's no microphone, even though it's on.
Is that better in the back? Okay, I'll try that. So unlike the reports that Bruce did for you in 2006 and 2009, you won't see any numbers in ours. Ours is not what he was doing was justifying what an impact fee could be. He gave you 4 options, you picked one, and you meaning whoever's on the planning board at that time. What we were asked to do this was to do a review of the policies, and then to suggest what might be recommendations going forward. And hopefully we've outlined that, because it's been a long time since the planning board has looked at this, apparently. I think hopefully we said it 2 or 3 times in the report. As simple as impact fees sound, when you say, gee, that's an impact fee, it is not an easy process to determine what the fee should be, but it has a pretty specific and time-restrained administrative process that goes with it. To sort of recapitulate what the report says, it has to be for impact directly related to what was reported. It has to be expended within a 6-year period for exactly that purpose. It cannot be used for something else. Cannot be used for maintenance or upgrade. It has to be for something directly related to the impact of the development that was charged the fee. And in this case, even though the school SAU was the recipient of the fees that are paid, the town is the trustee. And so the town wants to do this right, and it is also a somewhat unusual statute, and it really puts the operational burden on a planning board, which is not typically what you would do. Obviously, you're going to use the town staff for fund management and stuff. So what we wanted to do is make sure you understood what the rules were, how you got to where you are, more about how going forward. This is not a financial audit or a review. And then if you want to keep doing it and having impact fees as part of the regulations, there are suggestions on how to do it with more process in place. And if you don't want to do it, there's, I think, 3 or 4 suggestions of things you could do instead. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll come up for air and answer some questions.
Okay. All right. Questions? Yeah, go ahead, Tavis.
I'm just battling microphones here. So.
I gave you or sent you a copy of the treasurer's email.
Yep.
Can you touch on any of those points, since he happens to be here? Or would it be easier for the treasurer to stand up and rephrase, paraphrase, so the board has a picture of what's going on?
One of my first responses to that is, one of the things this recommended is opening up that dialogue between the planning board and the town and the treasurer, and hopefully also the school board. So I'm happy to see that dialogue started, because there hasn't been much of that as far as what we could see in records. If I understand some of his questions, I think they're more about what do we do. I think what we suggested in here is a couple things, and the first would be, as it says in here, is to see if the schools actually did spend the funds that were forwarded for the purpose of which the impact fee was set up, which is to pay for capital costs at the school level. And then kind of go from there. So I think probably most of the answers from the questions would be after having some dialogue with the school department, say, if I understand right from the numbers that were in that email, that of the $600,000 collected, of which 125 is still in the fund, so the school roughly got 400. Did they spend it on capital improvements in the school system? And then you have secondary questions of, did you do it within 6 years and other things? Being that, if I see from the records right, Tavis, that the bond issue has quite a while to run on it, I think it was 39 or some 2039. There's no requirement that, at least in my opinion, if the school spent more than the 400 on the capital improvements, I think that would give you a first good step to say, yes, we did spend it on an allowable cost, but the documentation wasn't great, and maybe going forward it could get a lot better. But I don't know what those numbers are, and I think the schools would have to, between the treasurer and the schools, they'd have to tell you that.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
I appreciate you're not an attorney, unless I misread. And I also appreciate you're not an expert in state statutory law either. But I'm going to ask you a couple of questions as if you kind of maybe were anyhow. The impact fees, as far as I'm concerned as a member of this board, when collected, were always intended to pay down the town's share of the school bond debt incurred building the new buildings up at Kingswood. What, in your opinion, legal authority would this board have, granted by state statute, to interrogate the school board and request that they provide documentation showing that the $400K approximately that has been spent already was indeed spent on the purposes that the impact fees were originally established for and transferred to them?
And I'm going to say something simple, and I don't want it to sound like I'm being flippant, but the major thing you had is you had the checkbook in your hand. And so you could ask them, before you get any more money, we want to see what you did with it.
Okay, that's fine, but
I mean,
that's not a legal authority. And
but you do have the responsibility of not releasing funds until you are sure they're being used correctly.
That's correct.
So
but as far as
until someone says, here is an invoice that says here's what we're using for, or here's a report or something, or a dialogue, you can withhold payment.
There's nothing in the statute establishing, under innovative land use controls, establishing impact fees that grants the planning board any kind of auditing function or authority over the disbursement of funds to the school board.
It does ask for you to make sure that they're using them in compliance with the impact fee.
It asks us to turn them over for the purpose in which they were established by ordinance.
Right.
It doesn't ask us to write at the bottom of the check for and then ask for proof from the school board that that money was deposited into the bond repayment fund.
I think that's I think when you make any public expenditure, there's some expectation that you know what you're buying.
I don't mean to be argumentative, but that would hold within an organization. But we're dealing with a separate legal entity that has no responsibility with this planning board whatsoever.
And
that means that there is a wall between the two.
Sure.
And I'm seeking for your advice or your expertise or whatever, suggestions as to how one penetrates that wall and gets to see what's going on the other side.
I think one of the things we suggested is to include the school board in your capital budgeting.
We do that.
So that
At least we have.
I don't think we saw that in any of the revisions.
Well, there is a school board member or school SAU representative on the capital improvement program committee.
Correct.
Right.
But the line item specifically for 23 is for maintenance items. It's not specific to
Right.
capital.
I'm not, if I may, I'm not arguing that the planning board has acted as Caesar's wife ought to in this case, but I am attempting to draw boundaries around the problem that seems to exist. And it seems to me that and again, I'm not a lawyer either, there's not a great deal of delegation of authority from the state to the planning board to set up an audit procedure the planning board can run to see whether or not the funds have been expended for the purpose in which they were, or for which they were levied. And given that, we're just a board of
Yeah,
volunteer citizens
I
with
think
limited
in writing
abilities.
your own ordinance, you could certainly ask for a degree of assurance from whoever is receiving it.
Yeah, once that ordinance is revised.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as it exists
And,
now.
and my understanding is that there hasn't been, it wasn't like, I guess, there's no presumption this was used for baseball fields or
No.
highway department. It's documenting what probably happened.
Yeah, I think everyone's going to agree that the purpose for which the funds were levied was indeed the purpose for which
Right.
they were dispersed.
Right.
But the question is setting up a paper trail, and that appears to be difficult.
Yeah, and not to, I think as we said in here, this is an RSA that is decreasingly being used for the reasons you're here tonight looking at. Decreasingly, because it has an administrative burden, and there are other ways like exactions and such that can perhaps do what the impact fees. And several towns have had to, had to pay people back. So you see this being used less often. As we said here, it was clearly adopted legally and in good faith by the town. You went by, you had someone do all the evaluations of the cost. You did a rational decision about which model you'd use. All that process is right on the button. It just seems like it's been neglected for some time, and it doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it was neglected. And what we're saying is perhaps if you want to go forward, you probably want to make sure a little bit more of that. Tell me again what you did with it, not just there's a new building and we sent you some money. And I would imagine a school want to step on, but I think they're used to accounting for their money and would say, yeah, the new addition cost us X millions of dollars, and here's how that 400,000 was part of that.
Go ahead, Pete.
Task.
I know that you're not here to speak numbers. I know that you're not an attorney. I know that you don't even play one on TV.
I'm answering all the questions I'm not supposed to answer.
That's correct.
Great, yeah. So.
But the treasurer is sitting behind you.
Yep.
And I understand that part of the bill that the school district hands to the town, because the school district isn't allowed, as I understand it, and he can shake or nod, is not allowed to carry over an unexpended fund balance. The budget for the year is X, and this is, we have X amount that has to come in, we pay all the bills, and we move on to the following year. If in the calculation, two different ways to look at this. The town should probably determine whether the school bill, just to make it brief, if the school bill annually accounts for the impact fee revenues received, question mark, or is it possible that the town has effectively been double paying on those years where the full school tax bill is levied across the taxpayers in addition to the funds from the escrow account for capital improvements, or for impact fees?
Yeah, and I really have to punt on that because you'd have to look at books and
Okay.
so.
Because I know
I get just what we were saying here is if if the SAU used the funds for capital improvements as identified in the original charge to the developer, then that's a starting point. Now, if for some reason it happened twice, I'm really...
There needs to be a conversation between the school and the town.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Peter.
How much money is in this account at the moment? Does anybody know? And how much has ultimately been spent? How much has ultimately been spent?
Can you come up to the...
Good evening. I'm Carl Baggy. I'm the treasurer. Have been for about exactly 1 year.
So how much has been actually paid in bond interest and paid back in the bonds?
I don't know that. That's the school. School has the bonding, not the town.
But in fact, you find that they're paying, in the millions, they borrow in the millions of dollars, they're paying a whole lot of money.
Oh, for sure.
And so then the question to me is it an accounting issue or is it a real issue? In other words, if I end up saying that I'm going to donate to a particular scholarship fund for my college, that would mean ultimately that the college doesn't have to put money into that fund and they can use their money elsewhere. So if the town ends up saying that they're going to give this money to a particular project, and it is labeled coming from this particular fund, that is perhaps legally appropriate. But if the money came from without having that label that it's coming from this fund, isn't that money still going to the same purpose and from the same monies?
Well, from what I see, the impact fees have been collected over the years and remitted annually to the school district, along with the tuition bill, if you would, that the school district sends the town. So we pay, the town pays for the per pupil, the number of pupils. They've got a formula for that. And in addition to that, we remit the fees that have been collected, the impact fees, over the last year. My opinion, or at least my interpretation, would be that the town would reduce the invoice from the school district by the anticipated collected impact fees and square that away at the end of the year when we know exactly how much have been collected. I don't think that's the way it's worked, but that's just my interpretation of it. The town is collecting impact fees, turning it over to the school district. That school district services more than the town of Wolfeboro.
So whose money is it? Is it the town of Wolfeboro's or is the schools?
The town collects it and turns it over to the school.
So whose money is it? I don't.
It's the town's money.
It's the town's money that was collected
It's
for the
town's
purpose of
money, and so
offsetting the
therefore,
capital expense.
if the town collects it, we then should, that's part of what we give, and so I would say that the amount which we're billed should be reduced by that amount.
That's my position. And I would guess that when the impact fees were implemented to mitigate the increased costs from the school district as a result of the infrastructure improvements.
So does this mean that the school district needs to rebate the town of Wolfeboro for monies which they have given in excess of what they were billed?
I don't know that.
Okay.
Well, I
Good
think
question.
We have to remember the purpose of the impact fee. It isn't to pay down the cost of tuition per pupil. It's to pay down whatever share of the indebtedness the district ran into that is Wolfeboro's share for the original purpose. And that is different than looking for a rebate from the school board because that bond has not been paid down to zero yet. And our share presumably hasn't been paid down to zero yet either, since we carry the bigger share of the 5 towns. So, question for you. You've been treasurer for a year. Have you made payments to the school for impact fees?
No,
You have not?
no.
So you're not familiar with how the process would work, or would you be?
I'm familiar with the process, but I question the process. We've had discussions with the town manager and the finance department, and we are addressing this as we speak.
Well, how are you addressing it?
We're in the discussion.
Carl was integral in me in working on what to ask ADG for. In fact, one of the responses, and Stu mentioned Matt Henry, who did a lot of the legwork on the report. The short answer was that's probably best until the dialogue happens with the school to sort out how and where the money is going, and we have a better sense of that accountability, not audit level necessarily, but if we have some accounting of how and where it's going, then we can make sure that we're better following the program.
Okay, well, we know that we have collected these fees, and they amount to $600,623.
Correct.
And so, I mean, presumably, that's what got passed on to the school.
Correct.
400,000.
480.
Oh, we know without a question that every impact fee that was collected went to a special separate interest-bearing account that Carl has governance over, if you will.
Did that account exist before your tenure here?
Pardon me?
Did that
Yes.
account exist before your tenure?
Yes.
Yes.
It did. So we have some form of reconstructible accounting trail, payment of impact, collection of impact fees by the planning board, payment to the treasurer, and eventual expenditure up to the town, up to the school board. So we have some way of reconstructing.
Oh, we have all that.
We
Yep,
do.
We do, yep.
So,
Where it becomes interesting, and I think once the town check goes to the school, it becomes school money, where the discussion becomes interesting. We don't really have audit authority. We're handing it to them on the presumption it's going for the bond, but we don't have anything to show, an invoice or a receipt or what have you, that it.
Well, that was my question to this gentleman here.
Correct.
We have no legal leverage over the school board
Right.
to force them to show us how they've expended the funds other than their goodwill, which I'm sure we can rely on. But absent that, it seems to me that once the funds have been paid out by your office to the school board, our town has pretty much done what we're supposed to do legally vis-à-vis school fees, impact fees, I mean.
I can't answer that question.
Well, I understand. I'm just stating my opinion.
Yep.
is it possible to add language? The planning board could perhaps say this money is to be expended only for paying down the debt, period. As if, this money is only for paying for this gym or whatever you might donate money for. And then we would know that at least we directed them to use that money. I don't know how we oversee that, but.
I think that's in Article 26A anyway. In the ordinance, it sets up impact fees. It establishes the purpose that the impact fees is going to be levied for.
Yeah, but
So
do
that
we,
has the force of law.
yeah, but do we give it to them with that message also?
Well, I don't know. I guess we could disperse a check along with a copy of the ordinance, but
Or a cover letter, yeah.
Yeah,
or a
cover
letter.
letter.
Or a letter, but, having been paying impact fees to the school district now for a number of years, one would assume that they would know what this money is being given to them for, rather than just a gratis check.
Right.
Okay,
I have two Ricky questions. What year did this start? That's the first question.
2011.
Okay, because construction on Kingswood started way before then. And what was the exact construction, if you will, that the impact fees were facing? Only Kingswood, or New Durham's new roof, or Ossopi's new roof, or Carpenter School's backside, or what? There's been a lot of construction since 2011 and before.
Maybe I shouldn't say, but as far as I remember, I was not on the board at the time, they were established to pay down Wolfeboro's share of whatever its share of the bond was for constructing the district's buildings. We're a member of a district, so we share, I believe, this would work this way, a combined liability for anything that the district does. So in other words, Ossipee doesn't pay for Rossipee's roof only. Ossipee,
Right.
Wolfeboro, and everybody else pays.
Right, but the impact fees that were collected in Wolfeboro, why would those go towards Ossipi's roof?
Well, it goes to the school district, and then they
then, yeah.
apportion how that's spent. But we, again, it's a cooperative school district, so we don't pay for 100% of Ossipi's roof. We pay for whatever our share of Ossipi's roof might be, if that's the way it works. And I'm not there at the time, so I don't know.
Yeah, because I'm really confused on that
It
whole
was
thing as to.
for the bond, for the, when the high school was renovated. That's what it was for. That's what I assume that it'd still be used for.
Then I was in error.
John?
So I wrote down, excuse me, a couple questions here. I'm going to start from the back end, actually. I would think that since the school does a good accounting program, that they would be able to, in advance, tell us what the capital costs are out in front a year ahead before they go and they spend that money. And so they would be able to tell us what their projected costs are before we send them the money. And I mean, I can't believe that there's not a standard audit for the capital improvements that are undertaken at that school district level. And my last question is, what would happen if we didn't send the money?
We haven't.
We have collected it, so we have to send it.
But is there any way of us finding
limit?
what the capital costs are ahead before we just send them the money?
Well, as Kathy pointed out, the ordinance was established to recover some of Wolfeboro's share of the costs of the bond issue for the high school. So we know what the high school cost, what the bond cost. We know what Wolfeboro's share would have been of that construction cost. So our impact fees are going towards that, whatever it is, 12.5% or whatever the percentage might be of the cost of building that high school building. So we have $100,000 we owe, and we pay that down over time. That's how the program worked.
I don't understand why there's a problem understanding what the capital improvements are.
Well, it's the building of the building. So we float a bond to build the building,
Understood.
and we're paying down our share of that bond.
Understood, but the
But what's
question
that
that
number?
I'm hearing is, what are the capital improvements that they're putting the money towards? That's what the gentleman there brought up. They don't know what the capital improvements are. Is that correct, sir?
Tough acoustics. I think what we said is the request has been made without much detail about what it's going to be used for, and the payment has been made without asking for much certification of what it's going to be used for. It's been basically we've been doing it this way, so whatever. Just a couple things to slice and dice here a little bit more. Whose money is it? Well, if you don't use it in 6 months, it's the developers.
6 years.
6 years. So the town is a trustee. This is not a property tax. It should not be affecting your school ratio thing. It's one of the reasons why this is a tough thing to administer. So the 140 that's left, you want to make sure that doesn't stay for more than 6 years, or you got to pay it back with interest. So remember, you're a trustee. You're not. This is not another new source of town revenue. It is a fund paid for by developers as they come in the door. That's why some years you're going to get the fee's going to be up, and some years it's going to be zero, because some years you have development and some years you don't. But it is for that one very specific use, and it's not part of the per pupil general fund tuition reimbursement.
So you're saying it's crucially important to find out what that dollar was spent on and if it was spent
Yes.
in that 6-year period?
Yeah, and I think your earlier point, sir, is that Could they tell you that? And the answer is, of course. I just don't think it's been asked on either the giver or the receiver. And that's what we're saying.
So in reality, somebody knows how much money we still owe.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but I didn't hear.
So in reality, someone somewhere in an office knows how much money Wolfeboro still owes on that particular bond.
Oh, sure. Oh, I'm sorry. I would
And then
guess
we'd
so, yeah.
stop saying, and then we'd say, oh, we paid up. We don't need to collect the impact fee anymore. We're paid up. Is that how it works?
Yeah, if, depending on what the impact fee language says, why you're collecting it, yeah, you either have a balance or you don't have a balance, correct. And I guess the assumption I was trying to make earlier is if you've taken from your trust and given it to the schools, $400,000, for what I understand is probably a multi-million-dollar project.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
That has, of which this town has the largest portion. I'm guessing, and I haven't looked at any numbers, but they can probably justify that there's at least $400,000 worth of capital improvements in what they've built, even though they didn't show it to you each year that you sent it, and
Right.
you didn't. And so I would start there and see if that's correct. And then that's why we said going forward, you probably want to have a better system of either the treasurer asking for more certification before releasing that 140, or the school just saying, here's our report on that fund, the capital fund for the new building, and there it is. And then you would have that
Right.
documentation.
So what we've missed is getting it annually.
Yeah, and and
That's-
amongst other things,
yeah.
you're also supposed to be looking at the numbers that Bruce originally set up for you, saying, here's why you're charging X thousand dollars per housing unit. It doesn't mean you have to keep going out and buying consultants and stuff, and we don't sell that, so I'm not trying to get you that. But it just means somewhere maybe a small committee could say, has anything really jumped away as far as cost or something like that? So
We were getting there a couple of years ago, but
Right.
then Bruce decided.
it's just one of those things that
Yeah.
I used to be a planning director, and there's probably 60 things that a planning board is supposed to do annually in 12 meetings. And so it's one of those things that it might occasionally get jumped over.
Go ahead.
I think so far the discussion really has been about accounting issues as to how these monies are spent. And I don't know as anybody here has specific answers to that. It's a question of whether we get a rebate from the school board or we get credit or whatever else. I think that the questions which are really important to us are on page 3 of your document, which says, should the town of Wolfeboro decide not to continue to collect impacts fees, and then it's, could we adopt other statutory enabled programs, or do we deal with infrastructure fees in some other way, or whatever? These are the issues I think that we need to deal with tonight.
Right.
We're not going to solve how each individual dollar went from point A to point B. It's not going to happen tonight. It's a huge project for the treasurer, and I don't envy him that. But that's not what we're here for. We're here to figure out what's on page 3.
Yeah, and that's the policy.
That's the policy.
Policy we
We're
put forward.
policymakers. We aren't accountants.
And I'm going to split here. If the town gets a rebate, which is a term I don't want to use.
I don't care whether they get a
No, no,
rebate or
let me-
we want to make the policy.
If for some reason the school SAU says, we didn't use any of this like we're supposed to, we use it for lunch money, I don't know, whatever it is, and they send the whole thing back, you have to turn around and send the 400,000 back to the people who paid it with interest. So,
But we don't know the answer to that.
Right, so
We
that's-
really are here to
Right.
decide what we're going to do in the
so you don't-
future
you
rather
don't
than
think
what we.
of it as the town getting a break, because it's actually going to cost the town money.
Well, and to be clear, I don't think anyone knows tonight or even has enough of the answers to know tonight whether you can address those policies. I think what we've heard pretty clearly is that we need to get in touch with the school, get a better handle on where we are currently, and then the board needs to have a discussion about to keep or not keep impact fees, to increase the, if we keep them, do we need to increase the rate, decrease the rate, et cetera, to better balance out the impact fees?
Hence the whole, take a look at the big picture.
That's right.
Okay.
And we're here to make policy, we aren't here to, we'd like to ask the questions to get the answers to see how it's going forward, but we're not the accountants. We're not going to be, as Mike suggests.
Right, and
That's not what we want to be.
as I said, and it is a statute that's being, planning boards are not set up to be fiscal agents for
No.
a bunch of things.
One further question.
Please.
Is this,
Hold up, you're here.
this trust nature of the funds, because they remain in trust until we can show within 6 years they have been expended by the agent for which they were adopted correctly?
Right.
Is that trust nature of those funds the base reason why a lot of towns are getting away from impact fees?
Yes. And the documentation, I won't say where, we worked with one town that had to pay a lot of money back with interest because developers who paid it said they weren't using it right, and they blended it a bit. This was a traffic one. And so as part of this intersection, they were also paving the road.
I know that case, yeah.
And they mixed them together, and the developer said, no, we paid for that traffic light.
Yeah.
Right.
And the town said, well, it made great sense to get the whole thing done at the same time. And the judge upheld for the developers. So, and there certainly was no malfeasance there. There was no intention to do anything wrong. It's just one of those, oh, why don't we just get the contractor to do the whole thing instead of half of it? But the statute is very tight, saying, and that's as our report says, and the planning board is the administrator,
Yeah.
which is also, that's another
And a
reason why
chance.
people are going,
Yeah,
we'd rather
exactly.
do something else.
So I'd like to recommend that at a minimum, we send a cover letter that states if we send further money to the GWRS, whatever that is called, that we send a cover letter that states that this is to pay down the debt service specifically, because that's why we collect it. And then every year or every 2 years, we review how we charge the impact fee and if the situation has changed. So we have a record at least of this is how we're spending it and this is how we're collecting it. Seems like that's our job.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm assuming that we get an accounting in our bill from the school district as to what portion of the funds that we owe are for the debt service.
I don't know that to be the case. I think they have a formula that, from their budgetary process, that comes up with a per pupil cost, and they assess all the participating towns and send them a bill.
So it could potentially, though, if we had the information from the school district, we could find out what portion of what we pay is for the debt service, in simple
I would think
terms.
so, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think that we're trying to say that each dollar we collect has to go a certain way, but we know what portion of our debt to the school district is for the debt service, and we can then say in the payment that we provide to them, what portion of our payment goes towards that.
That might work.
So we'll know how much of what we pay is going towards that portion of the debt.
We have to keep
It's
them
not rocket
separate.
science. I think it's,
Yeah.
you know.
We have to keep those funds separate, though.
I'm just,
No, what I'm trying to say, though, is that,
You need to speak in the
yes, but
microphone.
when we send a payment to the
You
school,
do have to, I'm sorry, just to repeat, you do have, for the impact fee, you do have to have, somebody has to say it was used for the purpose it was collected from before we, town trustee, released it. So I'm trying to do is.
no, I understand you can't
mix it
commingle
with-
the funds.
Don't mix it with the whole bill you get from the school district every year that says how many kids we have and all that. This is unfortunately, a sort of a PIA standalone.
Yes, but what I'm
responsibility.
trying to say is we could derive from the information from the school district what portion of it is for the debt service. And then perhaps when we send the money to the school, it could be in two separate checks, one for the debt service and one for the rest.
I think the question is, did they spend $400,000 on capital improvements related to impacts to development? End of sentence.
Okay.
If they decide to do it by debt service, if they used cash, that's less important than did it go into that bricks and mortar.
Okay.
Does that help a little bit?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to look at this from a different point of view here, is to think of this as kind of a business type deal. Has this whole item begun to cost us to use? Is it time to trade in the car because it's starting to nickel and dime us? Is it past its useful life? Should this, should this end? Should we say that, okay, the school district is doing a great job of billing us correctly? Or is it worth us spending thousands of dollars and 15 people to try and figure out the pennies as to what's going on? We did this, and this over 16 years. Maybe it's time that we think about, maybe it's at its useful end life and it's time to trade it in because there's new technology and we need to look on. Just a question.
Two comments. One for the treasurer. Do we have procedures set up now that will control the disbursement of funds to the school district out of the impact fee account so that those monies are traceable over time?
So your question is, if we give the school district a check, will they render an accounting to us as to where it went?
As of now, do we have the impact fees in a separate account? And when you write a check to the school district for whatever you're going to write them a check for out of that account, and it goes to the school district, do we have some way of showing, should we ever be asked by the developer who put the impact fee up, that that money went for the purpose that it was supposed to in the ordinance?
No, and herein lies the reason why we questioned this last April or May. And we've been struggling with this entire process since then as to what to do. What's the basis of the impact fees? How have they been handled? Do we really turn them over carte blanche to the school district, or do we reduce the bill from the school district? Right now, there's more questions than there are ways to deal with this.
Can I ask one follow-up question? Is this actually under active work? You guys are actually working on this actively?
We're in the discussion process. Okay, we've put a hold on anything that we've sent to the school district. Right now, we've got 2 years worth of impact fees in the escrow account right now from the impact fees. We've got a handle on that. They're segregated. They're interest bearing, and the question is, and that's why we're all here, should we be remitting this carte blanche, or should we be doing it a different way?
Well, isn't it a simple idea just to go to the school and ask them?
I think that's what we have to do, yeah.
Well, I mean, I can't, yeah, okay.
So
I
this
mean,
is
I
really
know-
just,
I
this is
know
really
that
an accounting, this is an accounting issue.
It's actually an issue of liability.
It's an
more than
issue of liability,
more
but
than
the accountants need to be able to demonstrate that we have no liability.
Except that we are the
We
guys
are-
who carry the can back.
Right.
Correct. But we need to get the information from the treasurer and the school board to know
Yes.
how we're doing.
Yeah, and that's
Right.
what.
And we
that's
still
part of
haven't
this.
gotten to the idea of, do we adopt other statutory-enabled tax programs?
I think you're getting ahead of yourself, if I may.
Well-
I was going to suggest that this board set up a subcommittee on your work program for 23, 3 or 4 members, maybe 3 members, not 4, to look and to work with the treasurer, the town manager, the planner, maybe a member of the Board of Selectmen, on how to deal with the current issue, and then what other alternatives the planning board might have come up with to answer your concern. Is there some other way of doing this other than through impact fees? That'd be a
Right.
recommendation to the board.
Yep.
And my recommendation would be, before we release any new funds, we ask them to demonstrate to us that the last
Right.
400 were used on capital improvements, pay down of the debt, whatever it was that was required, because that's what we have to do.
I think we need that kind of reassurance.
Yeah, and the second
right.
half of that, Vaughn, is where do we stop collecting the fee and putting it in Mike's pocketbook? to
And
say,
if-
oh, it's full, we got enough in it.
We can't stop collecting it.
And if this is money that we paid extra, we need to say we get that back, because to my way of thinking, the town ends up paying a bill to the Kingswood Regional School District. And some of the monies, from my point of view, that go to that bill would come from this particular fund.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, we should not be paying extra. And so we need to know whether we are paying extra or not.
Okay, it was really set up to pay off the bond for the high school.
But the town's
Renovation.
portion of the bond.
Right, the town's portion.
But it was set up to help the people of the town of Wolfeboro pay it off when other people are now going to incur expenses to us because they're bringing in more houses. So this is something paid to the town so that we can pay the school bill.
Well, our portion of the bond payment.
You know, if we never had any development in this town after the impact fee was initiated, we'd still have a bill from the school district, and they'd still pay down their debt proportionally as they would send out their bills. So it's
But the idea is that if the school district has to build more, and it is because of this extra development, which we're collecting taxes on or collecting monies on, then the town itself, the other taxpayers shouldn't be paying this extra burden.
That was the
I'm on the same page as
right.
you.
So,
Yes.
so it's a question of whether we are, that part of that we end up paying to the school board is part of what the town pays, or it is an extra thing.
There you go.
And that shouldn't be occurring.
Yep.
So the other point there, I think, that we need to consider is, we just took in another town a couple of years ago, Middleton, so possibly our amount should go down because somebody else is actually paying more in.
Okay, anything else? Okay, then, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
Okay. Okay, then, next steps. I think we have to encourage the treasurer and town manager to get the information that we need from the school board. I mean, if, you know, I suppose we could write the letter to them, but I'm not sure that that's
Maybe
what we
the
should be
planning board
doing.
put together a memo to the town manager and the treasurer asking for that input to better
Yeah.
guide the planning board.
Well,
Paper trail.
yeah. I mean, to get something from the school board that they are paying for the bond that we agreed to in 2010.
Can you add also not just the school board, but the business office? Just so the school board doesn't shuffle it along,
Yeah,
because
well,
they're all
right.
volunteers as well.
Yes, yeah, right. But they're also the ultimate, I guess, just like we are.
Can I make a couple of general comments? If you look at the way the ordinance is structured, it calls for the cooperation of the town manager, the treasurer, the planning board. And experience has shown from testimony tonight that the burden was kind of put on the planning department to assess the fee. The fee was then turned over to the treasurer, planning board, treasurer, town manager, planning department. Never, all of them had a handle on how the process worked, never ran checks and balances on each other to see whether it was working correctly. And now, 11 years later, we're left with $623,000 having been collected, $400K dispersed, and a potential liability on that $400K. Where did it go? Did it go for the correct purpose? Cast your minds back to the public hearing that we had on the ordinances that we proposed a couple of weeks back, and it turned out that there were almost total failure in communication between the Department of Public Works, the Board of Selectmen, and the Planning Board regarding the ability of the planning board to approve applications for multifamily housing, for example, and our lack of water and sewer capacity. We were unaware of that lack until a memo hit, not even addressed to us, in January of last year, saying that we were coming up to the top of the limit on what we could and couldn't build out. Big surprise to everybody. Again, a structural failure due to the lack of communication and cooperation among departments in this town. It's been my experience in this town, I've been in town government in one form or another since the late 80s, that individual departments and individual boards tend to act as if they were planets in a universe in which there was no other planet but themselves, running around their own sun, and then every so often bumping into another planet and saying, oh my goodness, where did you come from? We should all be cooperating together. When we set up this, if this board decides to set up a subcommittee to deal with impact fees, I would strongly urge the board to ask, as ex officio members, the treasurer come on board, a board of selectmen's representative come on board, someone from the town manager's department or the town manager himself come on board ex officio, and all work it out, because everybody's involved. And going forward in the future, any time an issue the planning board deals with that affects the general health and well-being of the town, every agent in this town who has anything to do with that issue should be part of that decision. Otherwise, we're going to wind up putting out ordinances like we did this time around, and members of the public are going to come in and yell at us about, didn't you know, why shouldn't you have, you should have known, blah, blah, blah. And we don't know because we got no cooperation from those who should have told us. Thank you. Swan song.
Okay, it seems, Tavis, that probably the best thing for you and I to do is to sit down and write a letter to the school administration and get the information that we feel that we need, and then copy the town manager and the treasurer and the finance director so that everybody knows what's going on. Does that seem like a good next step? Because I think we've got to get this situation resolved before we decide what we're going to do about impact fees. We've got an ordinance. We need to follow it. So, does that meet everybody okay with that? Okay, all right.
And I just feel kind of like somebody's going to come in next week, and do you charge them an impact fee or don't you charge them an impact fee? Because now we don't know when there's a question.
We have to charge the fee until something changes.
We are charging them because that's what the ordinance tells us to do.
And then we keep really good records from here on out.
Yeah, I've got, Terry gave me the information right through 22, and I'm assuming that nothing has changed, right,
Correct.
Tavis? Yeah, so we're still collecting.
It's still the same bus then for a while.
But
Right.
at least now you know there is a problem.
Yeah,
You've heard the treasurer say that they're working on it, and they have been since April, May, which is a surprise to me, but nonetheless. So you know something's in the works. So any impact fees that get assessed, and the board should probably be aware of what impact fees are assessed by the planning department.
Correct.
When the board finds out an impact fee has been assessed, put a little note in your diary, and make sure, follow up with treasurer, what's going on.
Oh, I trust Terry.
Whatever. The idea is this board's responsibility is to work with that impact fee. State tells you to, and your own ordinance tells you to.
But does the state have a way for people to end the cycle that has been here if we so choose?
Yeah, you just rescind your ordinance. Hold a public hearing. Do you want it anymore? Everyone says no. Great, you take it off. Have a public vote. They don't want it. It's done.
'Cause I think that should be an option when you get together in your group to talk about
That's what
Well,
you're saying.
how do we get to end of
That's
life?
what the planning board is going to make that determination. Okay. With we can form a committee, but ultimately it will be this board that will make that decision, okay? Okay.
Okay.
Then, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope you have a better trip back than you did up here.
Hey, go through Meredith.
Oh,
They went up Main Street today, they were putting gravel all down the side of the roads to fill all the areas where the water washed them all out and gullied them.
Must have gone up.
okay.
Down?
Okay. All right, and Tavis, we need to kind of move on here. Okay, thank you.
That one,
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the 2023 work plan. And Tavis, you sent a list to everybody. It was in our packet. Right here. Okay, I had a couple suggestions. Shoreline regulations, the, yeah, it was in the packet.
I didn't get one in my packet.
Okay, all right, well, there it is, right there. Shoreline regulations, we had a discussion about dead trees. Can we sort of figure out if we need to change the ordinance or what we should do? We talked about meeting with the tree warden. So the other issue is the short-term rentals. I mean, we probably need to keep that on the work plan. And then at the last public hearing for the warrant articles, we talked about Bay Street and Wolfeboro Falls Limited Business District, not allowing residential units on the first floor, and we were going to take a look at that. Driveway permits, we need to make sure that the regulations are up to date because I'm not sure if it is or it isn't, but we need to discuss that. And we talked about looking at the manufactured housing ordinance because that hadn't been looked at in quite some time. And then also the elderly and affordable nonprofit work housing. We need to add that to the list since we're revising housing ordinances.
And a number of these are contingent upon whether or not the things that are on the warrant article pass or do not pass.
Well, no, not really. I
Well,
mean,
short-term rentals would have a new definition.
Well, yes, but we may want to, I mean, we're not sure what's going to happen at the state, and we may have to pay attention to that. Anything else seem like a duplicate? I mean, some of these can be dealt with pretty quickly. Go ahead, John.
Elimination of boathouses on Lake Winnipesaukee in the town of Wolfeboro.
Elimination of boathouses?
Yeah.
Elimination.
Can you expand on that, John? Taking the boathouses off? or the regulation, or what are you talking about?
The construction of new boathouses on Lake Winnipesaukee. To not allow them to be built because they dig into the shorefront and minimize the impact there on the environmental end.
Okay. I just thought that was kind of state regulated. Didn't we just find out that all that was state regulated?
So one of the things, the state requires people to build the boathouses within the shoreline. That is not a choice of Wolfeboro.
Your opinion is duly noted, but my thought is that when somebody goes to build a boathouse, they dig it in and they disrupt the shoreline, and they only disrupt the shoreline, but they affect other properties that, when they do it.
It's absolutely correct, but the state in its wisdom decided that the only way you could have a boathouse is if you dig it in. I always thought that was a terrible mistake because it's doing more damage than building one over the water would. But they didn't allow over-the-water boathouses, only dug in. From what I understand now, they're beginning to think that that might be the wrong way to go, and there's some movement in DES to allow only built over-the-water boathouses and no longer dug-in boathouses. So that's an issue that's in play in DES. So I think that you should monitor that over the year coming, see what DES is going to be doing regarding boathouses, see how they play out. But they're the ones who give permits for boathouses on Winnipesaukee.
Yeah, but one can be more restrictive than the other.
You could make I presume you could make an ordinance that says no more boathouses, period, on Winnipesaukee, but I'm not sure how that would stand with the state.
Well, it seems that we did that for Lake Wentworth.
We did that for Wentworth.
Right.
I think the difference isn't the size of the lake that's the differential. Isn't Winnipesaukee considered a great pond? Because it's over, I forget, 100 acres in size or something like that.
Well, and we go around Wentworth. Wentworth is in Wolfeboro. That may have something to do with it, too. Where Winnipesaukee is big.
I don't know.
I don't believe they're allowed on Wentworth.
No, then that's true. They're not.
Say, put it on the work plan, see where it can go.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, so anybody else have any thoughts? Okay, all right. Public input. Any member of the public want to speak to us? If not, I've got a letter here or memo from to the planning board from Debbie Orloff, 42 College Road. She says, "Dear ladies and gentlemen, I want to voice my support for continuing short-term rentals, Airbnb style, for any duration, not 30 days or more." And apparently she wanted to come to the public hearing or something like that.
I just received it as a public comment today, so I'm
Oh,
sharing it with
okay.
the board.
All right.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
I'm just reading to you.
That was her public comment, but she could.
That was her,
The general comment was the town shouldn't prohibit short-term rentals.
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Minutes. Well, anything else? Yeah.
Oh, not anything else. I was just going to touch on something in the minutes that was pointed out by one of your very own.
Oh,
If you go through and you double-check the times, it appears the planning board went forward and backward in time with opening and closing public hearings, which was not the intent. So on page 2, toward the bottom of the page, Kathy Barnard closed the public hearing. That should say 7:35. When we go over to page 3, Kathy Barnard reopened the public hearing at 7:45. Kathy Barnard then closed the public hearing 2 lines later at 7:50. And then you're back on track with the time sequence.
Okay. Someone had warped out, had they?
What's that?
Someone had warped out?
Well, apparently, because the first hearing was closed at 8:35 and then reopened at 8. So that was fun.
Couple of
Okay.
comments. Page 3, fourth paragraph from the bottom, Mr. Hodder stated he believes, add an S to believe, and then take the apostrophe out of its. Page 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth paragraph down, M. Hodder motion to approve the application, not the project. And page 6, second paragraph, M. Hodder, blah, blah, towards the end of that sentence, and new hearing would not be required.
Also, at the top of page 5, the first line appears to be missing some words. It reads, B. Harriman asked if the boards on mergers of the same lot. So I assume there's some words missing in there. First line on page 5.
Brad Harriman asked if the board's
Blank.
action on the mergers
I
of the
also,
same lots in November already changed the road.
I also believe that the, accidents happened, site modification plan, it was not me abstaining, it was Brad abstaining.
Correct.
On the
No,
action-
Brad abstained. You may also have, but I know
I
Brad
don't think I did, no. I did not abstain, but Brad did, but it's not
Oh, yeah, yes, that's right, it was Brad.
person,
Yeah,
name is
right, right.
It appears right in mine.
Here's right in mine.
I'm looking at this, I'm sorry.
Is that what you're looking at?
I did not abstain.
No, you're,
Oh,
On the minutes.
n-
Oh, I'm
on the
sorry.
minutes.
I'm
that-
sorry.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, and Brad, yeah,
Oh,
right.
just in the minutes.
Okay. All right, any other corrections, additions? Okay, somebody want to make a motion to
so moved.
approve the minutes?
Seconded.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor of approving the December 20th minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, very good. Motion to adjourn,
So moved.
second. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.